So I decided, well, I'm in Maine, so we might as well do a Maine type thing. And as last week, it was all sort of greens and some water. One of the things I really wanted to kind of show you a little bit about, excuse me, one sec. Hello? Yeah. Yeah, I'm in the middle of a day. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Bye. You know what? I can't talk to you right now because I'm demoing. Can I call you back? Okay, bye. Sorry about that. There was something that was coming in on. Anyway, all right. So I decided it would be fun to see what you could do with the colors, mostly in the rocks. And I'm working really small today so we can get to some of those. So I'm going to start my usual design. And I like the angle here a little bit of those trees. And let's just treat them all just squinting around like one big dark shape. And I'm kind of raising them a bit because if I go to here and then I go to here, it's going to be too much like 1/3, 1/3, 1/3. So I want to have less of the trees as I get to those rocks. And I want to angle this a bit. You see how I'm forcing that angle here for a slightly better design. That will be mostly dark up here. And again, that always goes to, don't just accept your photo, you know, think about what's going to work best in your painting. And I'm going to make the rocks, I think, more significant. Bring these guys down. And then bring the water. Very little of whatever that green mossy part of the rocks are. I'd rather have the more interesting colored rocks and then bring the water up to about here. And I'm going to take a bigger brush and just squinting down. These are fairly light. This is much darker. By the way, I'm going to try to figure out a way to set this up where you're not on an angle. I've been thinking about how to do that so I could paint over my computer, so to speak. Actually, maybe, is that better? I think I can do that today. There, you should see it more. That's probably better. And I like this little kind of grayish area here. Okay, and now I'm going to go right into some paint. Again, time being of the essence. So let's get some green, I think. I'm going to use, I've been using that little bit of that art medium. I like, it does make it dry a little slower, but I like the way it lets the paint flow. And I think I've told you, this one is the Daniel Smith. Okay. So I'm putting in the color fields now. So that's my basic color field right now for the trees. And now I want to get a color field for the rocks. And I'm putting in, I am using some coral. I'm using some of the Jaune Brilliant, but I don't want it to be sicky, you know, like that kind of sicky pink that things can become. So I've added some of the yellow ochre as well. I often do that for flesh tones also, so that they don't get too pink. And we'll just start, we don't have to make the rocks multicolored yet. I'm going to make them a little bigger. Add a little white to it so that there's a little too much the color of the canvas at this point. And I am thinking, I'm not doing the brush strokes quite in terms of each rock yet, but I am thinking in those terms and how that will, how those brush strokes can really help to define what those rocks will eventually look like. I don't know how many of you see my blog, but I did a rock piece that actually I was sort of happy with this week, and I learned a lot about the value of different, the importance of grays and what you can do with them. Okay, I want that big rock to sort of be where the water comes up to rather than too much of that, a little bit of that. And that's a little too dark, but I am looking for a sort of a gray, a little cooler. I'm going to put a little bit of the horizon blue in that for this area of the shallow. And, you know, I'm not trying to think so much what that is, because if I try to think about, if I think too much about what its structure is, I'll probably draw out of my head rather than just say, okay, there's light there, there's dark there, that's what I'm looking for, where the lights are, where the darks are. So let's put a little bit of this little white here. Of course, I'm not doing it pure white yet. And I do, even in this time, even now, before I'm necessarily changing a lot in terms of the value or even the colors, but I do try to change the hue a little bit as I go along, so that even at this stage, I'm sort of making some of those decisions. But then I have to be careful not to do too much of that too soon, because it can be a trap where you don't want to make any changes. All right, so this is kind of stage one. I've got my darkest, I've got my rocks in here, and let's see, and I think design-wise, this is sort of in the middle, so maybe I'll bring down the rocks just a bit more. So it's not quite in the middle, because I do like them, and I think they're sort of interesting. Could go that way, or it could be more water. Maybe I do more water. Yeah, I think I'll bring the water up instead. And bring these down in here. And I notice, if you look at your photo, I think you'll see that here it's almost a greenish kind of a color, but it does turn much more blue as it transitions. It doesn't change in value. It's important to realize that value is not what's changing there, but the hue is changing, which gives it a certain kind of depth as well. So, okay, I'm gonna scrape down my palette here. So, because it's also very small. This is the that tiny Strata. I think it's the Strata Mini. I like it a lot. Great for traveling. And let's get started defining a little more of the trees. And I always put some warm in my trees. I never just do green or green and blue, or I always want to have some warmth in the tree. It definitely gives it more depth. Sometimes a little alizarin with your sap green will really give you a good dark, lots of depth to your trees. And I'm just giving myself that mark to know. And I will do this before I'll put in any of the sky holes. And I am squinting, and I'll change this hue as well. So whereas here it might be a little greener, here I'm using a little more alizarin in this area where I think it gets a bit darker. And then it gets lighter again. So I've added some yellow ochre to the green to give it a kind of, and a little bit of the cadmium, well, I call it cadmium orange. It will definitely give that feeling of, actually not the color of that olivey green that you get on those trees. And I'm just keep working this little puddle, adding, in this case, I added a little cadmium yellow deep, or cadmium yellow, adding a little more of that as it lightens here. And then making sure that I get it dark enough too, because now I'm starting to get a little too light. So I'm going back with some of my alizarin and some of my sap green, and maybe a little bit of the verditer blue. Again, because every time you give a little bit of a different hue, you add interest, even if you're keeping the value the same. Is this still straight for you guys? And come in with a little bit of the sky holes, and I don't want them to be too blue. It's not a particularly blue sky anyway. So, so I go to my lighter values. I took some of my lilac, some of my lavender, excuse me, some of my horizon, some of my lilac, some of my jaune brillant, and I just want to create some sky holes. Now, not as many as you see here on this, because I've raised it. I raised the where the trees go, so there are a lot. They're not going to be as many sky holes. And I use them also to carve the tops of those trees rather than drawing, out the trees. We can use our negative shape of the sky holes to create the look of those trees. Now, I'm going to leave that right now, stepping back. And the reason is that's not my story. My story's in here. So if I get too involved there, we may lose what I'm trying to do below it. So I'm going to start in playing with those rocks. And I've changed my brush size again. It's not a small brush, but not as big as the first one that we used. I'm going to add a teeny bit of my rose madder. And again, and I keep mixing it until I just get close to the color that I want, at least initially. And I'm looking at letting each brush stroke start to define some of the rocks. So that instead of just having to make the lines or the thickness of the rock, I can also use the brush strokes to start defining those rocks. And again, look how often I load that brush. It's coming on pretty thickly because I'm not really wanting to pick up that much that's underneath it at this point. A little later. And I am trying to let some of those rocks be cooler and some of them be a little warmer. Get a nice cool one back here. And I'm definitely not worried about getting every rock. I mean, I'm not particularly interested in things being all that photographic to begin with. Okay, that's too dark. I want to put the shadow of that rock, but what I put down is way too dark to be that shadow. And that goes back to what I always talk about, when that whatever the shadow is, it has to relate not just in, it has to relate in color and in value. So right now, it is way too dark. Still is. I think I need to scrape it and start up again. Even if it looks really dark in the picture, if you make it as dark as it looks in the picture, it does not look like the shadow on that rock. It looks like a hole in that rock. So oops, too blue. Okay, let's not obsess about each rock. Going right along. It's very easy to lose yourself in one rock. And I want that a little bit warmer. I dream of the days when you can do this in person and you can really see what I mean when I talk about something being a little warmer or a little cooler. Because sometimes it's pretty subtle. So I warmed up the shadow on that rock quite a bit. And I keep pulling from this little puddle of paint I've created here for my for the shadows. I like this puddle. It can pull a little bit of dark as I need it, warm it up a little as I need it. Nope, not warm enough. Okay, now I'm going to start moving down. Now there, even though that's pretty light, I'm going to want my much lighter ones to be more in the foreground because they're sort of going to be where the attention begins, not necessarily where it remains, but definitely where it starts. And my big challenge will be not letting them compete with the water either. And I do think it's really important to, and I probably can't stress enough how important, and part of the reason I wanted to do this demo today is letting the different hues play against each other within the same value ranges. It makes it almost twinkle as opposed to just being flat rocks that simply become, you know, we can make it look like a rock, but can we make it look like like something interesting enough to want to look at more than once? Now that is a pretty dark spot in there. Bring this around for that. and trying to create this sort of bouldery type rock here with quite a few different colors, but not more than a couple of values. And get a little more separation so that this there we go. That's there. Okay, a little more separation in here too. This is why I don't just work with the, primaries, because even though, as I said, you can get some great stuff that way, but I always just want to have at my disposal some other color that I'll try. And I think constantly in terms of value and in terms of the warm and cool of something to create, not so much, I mean, I think about color, but I think the value, if the value works, then the intensity works. You'll get whatever you're looking for, regardless of how many hues you use, how many different colors you might use. Okay, I'm going to step back for a minute. Okay, now this is too dark in here when I step back, so I want to create that rock a little bit more. And it has a lot of cool in that rock too. But that's too cool. The cooling and the warming of it are also somewhat subtle, not just, solid blue or whatever. Because the solid blue would stand out too much because it would be too intense. A little too dark, but we'll soften that. Okay. And now I have to see, are these all three too much the same size? Well, this one's longer. I'm going to make this second one, I'm going to pull this in a little more so that that rock is not the same size. Okay, see that? And then we've got a big one that's high, we've got a smaller one that's lower, and then we're going to have this longer one. And that way we've created a better design. Okay, now I'm going to step back. All right, I'm going to leave those rocks for now and start in over on this area, because this area, and I'm going to clean my palette, because that area can really give us quite a bit of nuanced color. I know I must sound like a broken record, but it's about keeping your values and then changing your hue. Now I don't want it to be too light too fast. And I'm going to have to really load my brush. I'm picking up too much of what's underneath it now. get some more white out here. I might have to even do it with a palette knife to really get it on there. Let's try that. Sometimes if I'm really having trouble, let's start with that. Huh, it's interesting. It's almost resisting it. No, doesn't look too bad though. And you use a palette knife, paint with it. Don't just, it's not little dabs. You have to think about brush strokes just the way you would if you were using a brush. Okay, leave that and come in with that nice kind of green that's here, which I think is really pretty there. Now for that, I've put in some horizon blue and some cadmium yellow to get a kind of interesting green. And I'm just thinking in this value right now. I'm not thinking yet about the reflections, those will come, but just getting the values down and the color down in this area. Now I turned a little more blue as it comes forward here. So I'm putting some lavender in to get it just to change that slight hue. And let's get, I guess we'll put that rock in. And again, when you have an hour, you make certain decisions that, you know, probably are helpful not to overwork an area because you just don't have the time to. Whereas, you know, if I'm sitting down doing this by myself, well, maybe I'll overwork an area and not realize I'm doing that. I want to get some of that nice bluish water, a little purple in there. So right now I've taken some Rediter blue, a little bit of rose madder, because that's a cherrier red than alizarin. Because I want to create some nice purples. And I'm doing that before I'll do the swirls of white. So out of that same puddle, I'm adding some white to lighten it for some of these areas up here. And I've got this nice little pink from the rock. I'm going to put a little bit of that in that white to change the hue just a bit, to warm it up a little. Those puddles are really helpful for you know, creating a sort of harmony among your paint. put a little bit of that other rock in also. The nice thing about this coral is then I can change the purple a little bit because there's yellow in the coral. And where before I might just use the rose madder and a blue to get it a little bit of a slightly different color of purple, I'll go to the coral and add that to what I've already got down here. And I want to get it a little darker as it comes forward. So now I've mixed the verditer blue, but I've mixed it with a little bit of the red oxide transparent. Again, there's some yellow in that, so it kind of grays it down a little bit. And I did put some rose madder in it. I want to get this area here. Okay, I know that's probably too dark. So I will add some lavender to it. That'll lighten it, but not brighten it. And a little lighter than that even. There we go. That's a better, not quite. I added some lilac also to kind of get that. Okay, and I think I'll put that rock in there. It's barely visible, but it's going to let me put some of the water around it. So I think it's a good thing to have there. Way too dark. Notice I still haven't gone to any pure white because the pure white is what I can use, or at least close to pure white, for some of the foaming that's going to happen. But that's going to be sort of similar to the masts on a sailboat, or, you know, they come in last. You make everything around them first, and then you do that so that it has a base upon which it makes sense to exist. If you put them in too soon, without any color to support them, any other values to support them, they can look too decorative and not like they're really defining that water. I'm going to have to step back in a minute because, again, being so close and thinking of it all this way, there's a tendency not to be able to really see what I'm doing, which is, believe it or not, kind of a good thing, because it means you're thinking as abstract shapes rather than trying to render. I'm not a renderer. For some reason, this area is built up. It's difficult for me to get anything going on top of it. So let's try scraping that off. A little better. I'm going to step back now. Now this is too confused, so I want to simplify that. Let's take a, I'm going to make it all water. I think I was thinking, oh, I'll make some of those rocks, but I think it's better to give this a little bit of depth and then just make it the water. Yeah, keep that for a minute. So I'm just creating a little more interest in here with color before I do the white. And then I got to step back. Okay. These are probably a little too prominent, so I'm going to come back in. Okay, let's see. I'm going to start some of the swirls so that then I can decide what needs to be changed or what can stay as it is. So I'm using that paint all over this. I'm using my dagger knife, brush, the long skinny one, because for this, and I'm kind of loading the brush with some pure white for the moment. See how this works. And I'm putting a little bit of the medium in it. You can see where I'm almost afraid to touch it to get it that feeling of the white that just comes up on the edge of the water there. This one can come out a little further. And I think you can see why it's important to have all that color going before you start doing this, rather than after. You can pull some of this in. It's difficult to do this and not let it get cartoony, which is what I'm sort of, a little worried about, that one little swirl being maybe too even, too cartoony. Pull it in a bit. Yeah, that's better. This is a nice brush, how long it is. It really can almost just float on top of it a bit to give you that feeling of the water, which is really, really nice, and could not do as easily with the other kind of a brush. And it is a rosemary brush. Okay, now I got to step back for a minute because I'm, okay, this, no, doesn't work. Let me get that out of there, but not necessarily all of it. Okay, let's see. So you start making these choices now about, you know, what you want to have included, what you don't want to put in. And I would say, although it doesn't look like I'm doing that, that that less is more, that you know, instead of overloading with too much of this, just give it, the best painting just has what it needs. And that's, of course, a rare event, but nice when that's what you can do. Okay, I'm just going to add a little bit in the bottom for depth down in here, a little darker. And a few of those swirls, which will be darker than the white. Not a lot darker, but okay, I am really in danger of overworking that, so let's take some of that out and just leave as it was. And let's see, up here, I think I want just a little bit more dark in those trees at the bottom, just a little darker in there. So my darks tend to be some sap green, some alizarin crimson, and some ultramarine. And sometimes I add a little bit of the red oxide transparent. And I'm not choosing to put the that trunk of the tree in. I think it's not particularly necessary. So let's see. I think it's just about done. Too dark. I think it needed to be darker down in this corner to sort of hold the composition a bit. give it some balance against those trees. And okay. All right, I think I'm going to stop this now. I'm going to bring it around so you can see it better. Say hi to everyone. Okay, so here we have our finished piece. It's small. I worked 6 by 8, I think. The water down here might be a little bit busy, but I think for the time being, I'm going to leave it. Could use maybe a few more of the white swirls, but I think I'm going to leave it for now. And does anyone have any questions? You can raise your hand. I can unmute you. You guys don't ask questions anymore. Not one? Huh.
Aline.
Yes.
Aline.
Yes.
It's Rosie.
Yeah.
You said you were using a dagger brush, but were you using a dagger or a rigger?
Ooh, you're absolutely right. Is that one called the rigger, the long skinny?
The long skinny one? That's
Yeah.
what you're using? Yeah.
Yeah, so you're right, that's a rigger. The dagger's the one that's on an angle and does really nicely with some of the trees, if you want. Yeah, you're right. I used a dagger. And I may use, a rigger, and I may do a few more in there. But as I said, for now, I just gonna leave it. There's a lot of it.
Do you ever paint rocks with a palette knife to give them a more of a chisel look?
I do. I don't like it as much on a board, and because I'm traveling, I've taken boards, but because I like the give that you get when you're on a canvas and you use a palette knife. I just find I really like what I can do. I have a painting, I should take a picture of it. I did years and years, well, years ago, it wasn't that many years ago, but possibly as many as 15 to 20. I had a student who challenged me to do an all palette knife painting. And I will take a picture of it when I get back home and send it to Camille to send everyone, because I liked it a lot and I learned an incredible amount from it. One of the things I learned was how you do paint just like brush strokes with a palette knife. It's not, I've seen people who just do a stroke and then another and then another, and it's almost like, but that's not what a palette knife can really give you, are big areas that are flat against some texture, and treating it the same way that you would if you were doing if you were using a brush. For these, I decided to use a brush. Again, partly because I'm on because I'm on this panel and I just doesn't have enough give. Bobby, did you have a question?
I do. So when you do a palette knife painting, do you use a variety of palette knives? Do you like the rounded edges ones? Or
I don't. This is the only one I like. It's kind of rounded. Wait, let me get the paint off it so you can see it a little better. It's just personal, but that could change one day. I'm changing all the time, but I really like this palette knife. Where
that's my favorite one too. Okay.
And I like the fact that it's not flat. Like I like this little dip, because I can really, spring it and use it on its side. And you can use it in a lot of different ways. It's really nice.
Great.
So yes, I do. Well, that might be a good thing for me to do as a demo at some point, is to do a palette knife painting, or mostly palette knife. Usually I like to soften some edges with a brush, even if I do use a palette knife. I am planning on doing workshops in the fall, so hopefully then I can see the work that you guys do and talk about it, and not just demo. And we'll see for anyone. Any other questions?
I'm sorry, can I ask another?
Of course.
will you do workshops online then? On
Yeah,
Zoom?
oh yeah. Yeah, definitely online. Yeah, I have a few that are going to move to online that were supposed to happen not online. And one is the Cape Cod Pastel Society. I think whatever it's called anyway. And there's a couple I was supposed to teach in Hilton Head and one in Jacksonville, Florida. And we're going to try to move those all online, which is why I really am trying to figure out how to do the demo straight on so that I'm behind my computer doing it and you don't have to see things at an angle. And I think I can figure that out. Anyway, any other questions? Anybody who needs to can always email me. And thank you for joining me today. If there are no more questions.